Hi there, welcome to Inside Intercom. I'm Liam Geraghty. Our guest today is growth marketing consultant and educator Ramli John, who also happens to be the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, Product-Led Onboarding: How to Turn Users into Lifelong Customers. And that, as it happens, is what we're talking about today, product-led growth. Ramli has some fantastic insights into this. On today's episode, he talks about the 3 milestones of user onboarding, he offers some advice on best practices for SaaS user onboarding, and he explains why you should think of it as a cyclical process rather than linear. It's a great conversation, so let's head over to the studio to Ramli John. Ramli, I'm delighted you're here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Liam, I'm super excited. I thank you for the invite. I really do appreciate it.
So before we get into it, I'd love to hear a bit about your journey to this point. You started out studying mathematics?
Yeah, I did. I started in mathematics, got into programming. I did a startup, and one of the failures there was around marketing. So I shifted from computer science here to marketing in growth. So like having that technical background really helped me stand out as a growth marketer. And I started consulting. And really, when I was consulting, one of the things that I really got into was driving trial signups. And this is way before things like product-led was called product-led growth at all. Like just trying to get people to sign up for a free trial. One of the things I noticed was that I'm getting a lot of signups, but I ask, are any of them sticking around?
Yeah.
And looking at the data and knowing a little bit of technical side to it, I got into their backend and I found they weren't sticking around. So that's when really I got into onboarding and seeing how much of a big problem it is for a lot of companies where it's often forgotten. I often call onboarding as the ugly duckling of growth because you got marketing focused on trying to get signups, and you got sales trying to get people to show the demo, and then you got product people who have a product roadmap. And really, onboarding is this black hole that's often forgotten. So I got into it and really started consulting around that, and ended up writing this book, noticing that there isn't a lot of content around it. The book, Product-Led Onboarding, that came out in 2021.
So the book is called Product-Led Onboarding: How to Turn New Users into Lifelong Customers. And like user onboard, like it's such a crucial part in a customer's journey. And I guess a good place for us to start might be to try and define user onboarding, because I suppose depending on who you talk to, some people might think it's just a product tour, a few emails, and others think that there's, a lot more education involved. And I suppose then there's people who don't even give it that much weight at all. So like, how do you define it, Ramli?
Yeah, the way that I define it is it's a way to essentially a first impression, right? From the first impression with your brand all the way to seeing and experiencing the value of your product is what I call onboarding, that first initial onboarding. When somebody comes to see an ad or your website, they're looking at it and, okay, that website is making a promise. And that's the start of, for me, the start of onboarding. Because if that promise is you're over-promising something and under-delivering, like there's no product tour that is going to fix that. So from the promise made to the promise experience, where they've achieved that promised land that you've said on your ad or your website or your copy, is what I call the initial onboarding. That whole journey is super, super critical from the promise made to experiencing that promise is what I would define as onboarding.
And I know you've written about kind of certain views or talked about certain views on user onboarding that, you talk about these kind of myths that are out there about it, kind of like the aha moment, and, that it starts after users sign up and finishes after they convert. Are they just myths?
Yeah, I think it's perpetuated. I mean, it's like with any buzzword, like product-led growth, aha moment. It has such a big misconception because it's hard to define. That if you look at it online, you'll get so many different definitions around it, and it's hard to define also because it could be a feeling. Like what's aha? Like it's also subjective as well. So I'd rather call it like value moments, like moments when your user is seeing the value and signing up and starting to experience that value. So I think that's a big misconception, especially with the aha moment, like you mentioned it, is that it happens after somebody signs up. but there needs to be several ahas for somebody to
Yeah.
get to that big. I try to avoid using the word aha as much as possible when I'm talking about onboarding, just because of that particularly. I'd rather call it value moments, because it's very clear that these are moments that you're making a value promise, that now you're making, the user is now eventually the whole goal of onboarding should be to get them to experience that value and eventually adopt that value.
Absolutely. We'll have to, I'll go back and bleep out any aha references after the show. So I suppose you talked a little bit about it there, but what is the end goal of user onboarding?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is a great tie back to your previous question around myths, that typically people think that, well, just get them to the aha moment. But I think that misses the whole point of onboarding, which is the end goal around product adoption. Like, how do you get somebody to adopt a product? To phrase it and put it in a different way, like, how do you get a user to build a habit around a product? And really, there are some books like Atomic Habits by James Clear or Tiny Habits by Dr. BJ Fogg that is more about building habits to build good habits, like running and being healthy habits that could be applied to users. And really, I think that that's the end goal, is like, how do you get users to get to that value moment of your product multiple times so that it becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, is really where the end goal is with onboarding. I know of several companies who push that it's not just the one time. For example, a great example I can think of is Slack. Typically the first moment of value is when somebody signs up for Slack and sends their friend or the colleague or the coworker a message. That's the first time. But for most people, it's like, oh, that's the aha moment. We're done with onboarding. But Stuart Butterfield was very clear about this. The CEO of Slack, he's like, what they found was like really driving an organization to send 2,000 messages, because they found that that's the moment when an organization is 93% more likely to stick around.
Right.
So I mean, like, they're really, really driving. Onboarding ends when we have a good indicator that this user or this organization or this team is going to stick around longer term, because that's when they built that habit or they've adopted our product longer term. And the end goal is retention at the end of the day with onboarding.
So I wonder, like, could you talk us through the kind of 3 milestones that you've mentioned before, I suppose, of user onboarding, like value perception, value realization, and value adoption? Because they are super important.
Yeah, I mean, those 3 milestones are super important. It goes back to making that promise. I mean, that value perception, when they realize how that product can help them be better, a better person, a better worker, a better employee, a better friend, if it's a consumer product.
Yeah.
That perception, that's when the promise is made and the promise is stuck in their mind. I mean, I'm using word promise, but this is essentially positioning and messaging. That's where like really product marketing is super important, because that flows through them realizing that and really experiencing it. Like, there's got to be that once I've heard the promise, okay, does your promise make sense? The experience of promise, okay, the promise has completed. I'm a better person. It makes my job easier. With Slack, it makes my workflow easier so that I don't have to be connected with email.
Yeah.
And the very final thing that you mentioned really is around that adoption. Now that I've realized it, this is something that I want to continue using. And that's the very last stage of this onboarding. Is like, I've heard about the promise, I've experienced it. Now I want to continue going forward with it. Those are what I see as the 3 milestones really to onboarding journey.
And like, some people, argue that user onboarding it's only about helping users to experience the value of your product and that's it. But I think you definitely disagree with this.
Yeah, it really isn't. I think it's just one of the examples I brought up is really around, if you want to, especially with people who are making New Year's resolution, they think about, I'm going to go to the gym. So they sign up for a gym membership.
We've all been there.
Yeah, same here. And they're like, they go to the first time at the gym, they feel great, they feel healthy, and they've experienced the value. But it's not enough. Like, as a business, sure, especially with product-led or self-serve products where a lot of users are not stuck in a long-term contract or even an annual contract in that matter. Like imagine if gyms worked in a way like you can cancel month to month. You're not signed up to an annual contract. There'd be a lot of cancellation in February. So like if I was a gym and I'm in that situation, my goal really is, so how do I get people to come back here again, get them excited, get them healthy, and come back over and over again. I think that's really why it's important in applying that now to products. Like, sure, you can help the person once, but how do you continue to help them ongoing so that they not just use your product for that one particular use case, but eventually there is that potential for them to use your product for other use cases where, going back to the gym analogy, they come to the gym, they work out. Maybe you can get them excited about your protein shakes that you saw at the gym. So now there's a whole like potential for revenue expansion because you're really helping this person out and getting them to be successful really gets tied back to your success as a business. I think that's how I would respond to that.
I love that, like you say, like using it once doesn't mean users will continue to value your product like by any means, and that it's kind of like a cyclical process rather than, just a straight line.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's not, I love how you put it there. It's not just a straight line. It needs to be cyclical where, people think, well, once they've experienced that value, they've, coming back, my job to help with onboarding is done. Like there is other use cases like that you can potentially use your product for that they haven't used it for. Like with the gym example I mentioned earlier, why don't you onboard them to massages if you offer that, or protein shakes, or what are other ways you can help this person, adjacent problems that they have around this problem space that they have. There's some great examples around that companies are doing, like with HubSpot, they have like HubSpot marketing, and then once they've realized that, let's another adjacent problem is HubSpot sales and HubSpot support. So I think that's a big use case. It's the same thing with Intercom. I think I used that in the book as an example where you get them to sign up for a particular use case, and then there's ways to onboard them to other use cases that gets them to expand to their plans and revenue.
So I suppose in terms of like some advice, what would some best practices be that like you'd recommend for like SaaS user onboarding?
I'm going to go to self-serve first. And the reason why I'm kind of picking on product-led or self-serve companies first is sometimes it's so easy to get disconnected with users. The thing that I love about sales-led, and it's funny because I coach at product-led, the thing I love about sales is you're connected with the customer. You understand your sales team understand their problems. You understand where they're getting stuck in their onboarding flow, and if there's a disconnect in the positioning or the messaging, like their questions will come up in the conversation in the sales side approach. In a product and self-serve, especially for SaaS, they need to be more intentional about really reaching out and understanding their users and understanding where they're getting stuck. And really, there's got to be a habit around user research and really like taking a look at, well, is our positioning and messaging really connecting? Because if we get that piece wrong, then there's no product tours or tool tips or anything that will work there. Is the messaging across the board consistent so that it's getting them excited about the product and getting them to come back over and over again? Is a product tour right for us? Because sometimes product tour can be adding friction, or would a user actually find that helpful? Because that when it comes to product tours, it really depends on your user set. So sure. I think that's a big first step. And often the big mistake that I see a lot of companies do is they just they ask me, Ramli, what's the best tool for onboarding so I can set up a product tour? And I'm like, how well do you know your users? Do you know the jobs that they're trying to do with your product, the jobs to be done? What are their emotional journey, what are the functional jobs they're trying to accomplish with your product? And often it's not very clear to them. And I think the danger with that is they set up this product tour and it becomes very convoluted. It points out every single thing because there is no drive to get users to complete this one, what I call the value realization, that moment when they realize that value product. And if it's not clear, then you end up just pointing every single feature in your product. So I think that's where I would start, is really understanding users, because like everything else flows from that, especially when it's designing and improving your onboarding.
So I suppose after talking through that, I'm kind of thinking, like, what are the signs of bad user onboarding, or what does bad user onboarding look like?
One of the biggest problems I've seen It goes back to that product tour that points out every single thing in the future. What happens with that is when people in an organization isn't clear about what user success is, and that's exactly what happens. And to make this even more absurd, as an example, it's like going into like a grocery store and somebody stopping you and pointing out, "Hey, Liam, can I give you a tour? Here's where the chicken is. Here's where the bread is. Here's where the banana is. Here's where the chocolate bar is." And you're like, "Hey, man, I'm just here to make a sandwich. Just give me what I need to make a sandwich." And when you have that clear idea of what users are trying to accomplish, then you can be like, "Okay, oh, you just want a sandwich. Okay, here's the bread, here's the mayo, here's the chicken." So I think that's the big mistake that I often see is like, "Oh, here's this feature, here's this feature, here's the feature." Like, how does that tie back to getting that user to that first quick win, especially with limited time, and a lot of users are very impatient? It's super, super important to be clear as to how that feature or that step is going to help them succeed right away, or else you're really going to lose them. I think that's what I often see as a mistake. Is just like pointing features that doesn't tie back to user success.
And I think that's probably why we ended up quitting the gym there with all the candy and chocolate that was being pushed on us.
That's so true.
I suppose one thing you mentioned earlier on, or one author you mentioned earlier on, was BJ Fogg. And I was going to ask you about kind of, if users are falling off during the user onboarding process, like what can you do about that? And I know that you're a fan of the BJ Fogg behavior model.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great model around building habits. I mean, I highly recommend his book, Tiny Habits, that is about, how to build good habits and let go of old ones. By the way, BJ Fogg works at Stanford. So like he's a behavioral scientist. So this framework that he has been applied to several of his students, as well as other people that he's worked with. So like, if users are falling off in terms of onboarding and not building the habit, he has this framework called the BJ Fogg behavior model, where like there's three potential factors that could be playing into it. The first one is ability, the second is motivation, and the third is prompts. So when it comes to ability, is there any way to make it easier for that particular step? So when I think about easier, like an example could be, can you provide templates or any way that you kind of remove, it makes it easier for users to achieve that first success moment or value moment for users. That's the first one. The second is around motivation. So how do you increase motivation? And one of the dangers with motivation is kind of offering reward. So if you do this, here's a free shirt. If you do this, here's the danger with this, and there's study around this, is that maybe people are doing that particular thing just to get the shirt and not necessarily to build that habit. So I think that's super dangerous. One thing that BJ Fogg suggested is really like to internalize what and visualize what is the end outcome. If you're going back to that gym to increase the motivation, it's like visualizing yourself as being healthy and fit during the summer, especially in wintertime. You're imagining yourself being successful with that. And it's the same way with users. It's like how this is really where messaging and copy and content really comes in to get people excited from the very early on as to like how this product, this use case can really help them succeed and become better with that. So I think that's motivation, is using content and copy to really get them excited about this. And the last one is around prompts. So like, when it comes to prompts, maybe there's not enough email or any kind of way to prompt people. And there's in-app prompts, which is like product tours or tooltips, or external prompts like email or texting. Those are ones that can be used. I mean, obviously, there's a moment where there's too many prompts, where you've gotten like 100 emails from different things. There's really got to be a balance there. And that's the same thing he suggested. There's just got to be enough prompts for people to continue with that particular habit. So I think those are the three things: ability, motivation, prompts. And it's been helpful to build habits in my personal life, as well as I think it's very helpful to build habits for users.
That's super useful. And actually, yeah, it's great to hear kind of like for habit building in general, that's really useful. And then just before we wrap up, just something I wanted to mention, like in your book, like I love the simplicity of you asking the question, like, why did you decide to read this book? Like, was it the cover? Was it the title? Was it someone recommended it? Because I think it illustrates so perfectly, that time and first impressions are so important in user onboarding in general.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, first impression is so critical. The example, we talked about different examples already. Another example is, imagine if like somebody's reading a website and they think that they're talking about a product management tool, and they sign up for it, and then they realize once they sign up it's actually a bookkeeping tool. Like there there isn't really going to be anything. Like it's like bait and switch. It's like having that
Yes.
first impression with somebody on the first networking event, and then you find out later on that they're not who they were when you met them for the first time. Like you'd feel maybe betrayed. You feel like there's a bit of
Yeah.
bait and switch. It's the same thing with onboarding. It's time to think about onboarding, and not just as a product thing or a product growth thing, but it really needs to involve sales and marketing and customer success, because that journey and that promise and that impression needs to remain from first to the very last impression, to be consistent.
So what's next for you, Ramli? You mentioned resolutions earlier on. I'm wondering, do you have any kind of big plans or projects for this year?
Yeah, I'm trying to write more again. I got busy in the
Great.
last year, and maybe not at this year, but maybe in a couple of years. Definitely writing another book. I've been like already toying around what is that next thing. I'm also like been recording the audio book version of the book, because I know a lot of people are like, we don't read books, we listen to books.
Yes.
So that is coming very soon. So hopefully when this comes out, like that audiobook will be out so that people can listen to it. And I'm narrating it myself, so that there's,
great.
More dynamic than, I stress what I mean with certain things versus like hiring somebody to do it.
Yeah. That's the one thing I always check when I'm listening to an audiobook is has the author read it? Because it's more authentic.
That's true. Yeah.
And then lastly, where can our listeners go to keep up with you and your work?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter at Ramli John, and then LinkedIn. You can also find me Ramli John. And yeah, feel free to send me a message. I love to hear from people. My DMs are open.
Great. Well, Ramli, this has been really useful. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ramli John. And if you did, let me know by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, if that is your podcaster of choice. Or if not, just say hi on Twitter at Intercom. Okay, that's it. I'll be back next week with another great episode. See you then.
This is Inside Intercom.